Hello everyone, in this video we'll be exploring how to use your timeline along with some of its editing functions in Pretend. Now Pretend gives you the option to use your story groups, which means you can have multiple timelines embedded in one another. But to keep things simple for now, we'll set up our project to contain one main timeline by selecting None in the project browser's new project menu. I'll be going over how to make use of multiple timelines in another video, and we'll be sure to include a link to a story group tutorial in this video's description below. Now that my project is opened up, we can see our main timeline labeled Show. I'll add a track, and we'll want to import some media to get us started. If you ever want to make sure that you're working on the right timeline, just double-click on it in the library. I want to change the name of my timeline and story group, so I'll click twice on the name in the library and change it to Rough Cut. Notice the name also changing here in the tab. I'll drag a clip from my media folder into my timeline. You can now see it in my timeline, as well as in the story group's items panel. You can also notice how the video clip also has an overlay of its audio. If a clip doesn't have audio, then this doesn't show up. And now that we've properly set up our timeline, we can have a look at the timeline interface. You can click play in the viewer, hit the spacebar, or click and drag to scrub through with the playhead to view what's inside your timeline. You can use the zoom controls to zoom in and out of your timeline. This also works with the plus and minus keys on your Mac. If you're using any keyboard shortcuts for your timeline, just make sure to click inside of it to first activate these timeline-specific shortcuts. Otherwise, they might not work. If you want to hide your timeline to make more room for your viewer, you can click on the Show Hide Timeline icon right here. Now these are your breadcrumbs, which help you navigate through your different timelines. But since we only have one timeline that we're working with, we won't be using this control much in this tutorial. These arrows can also help you navigate through different levels of story groups. But again, since we're not using story groups here, we won't be using much of them. To the left is your text tool, which if clicked on will add a new text layer at the top of your timeline. Now we've also already gone through text and titles in another video, so I'll make sure to include it in this video's description. Next to this is the lock. You'll notice three different lock icons, one above your timeline, one on your track header, and another one on your clip. Using the lock above the timeline locks everything into place. Using the track header lock will lock that entire track's content into one place. And using the lock on the clip will only lock that single clip into position on that track. If you ever want to edit a clip or access its animation controls, you'll have to first unlock it. Next to the left is our timeline pop-up menu. Let's go through some of these options. Add a track, of course, adds a track to your timeline. Enable scrubbing makes the playhead follow your mouse on the timeline without clicking and dragging. You can also hit S to toggle this function on or off. There's the razor tool, which lets you cut your clips. You can also hit X on your keyboard for this. This menu also shows you that you can hit G to jump to your playhead in the timeline. So let's say I'm zoomed in and I don't see my playhead, I can hit G and it'll bring me to wherever my playhead is. It also shows that hitting M will move my playhead to wherever my mouse is on my timeline. You can hit F to bring your timeline to fit perfectly within the space available that you have. This way you can see your entire edit within your timeline. This is one I use all the time. And lastly, you have your zoom controls to zoom in and out of your timeline, as well as your Show Hide Tabs control, which will simply hide the different timeline tabs at the top. Since we're only working with one timeline in this tutorial, I'll hide the tabs to make a little more room. Moving on to our track header controls. Up top is your track pop-up menu, which allows you to add, delete, or duplicate whichever track you're on. You can also collapse a track, which just minimizes it to make more room. This control is also accessible from this bottom icon over here. You can disable a track, which is the same as clicking this power button on the track header. Now, disabling a track will only hide this track, but be careful because you can still edit and move things around when it's being hidden. Lastly, you can lock a track from the pop-up menu, which we've already explained, and you can also mute a track to omit any audio from playing. Let's look at some of the features within our clips on our timeline. First up, to the left, is the name of the media asset. To the right are our lock and disable options, which we've just discussed. But in the middle is our animation control. Now, by clicking on this, you can access the clip's animation control menu, which allows you to animate some of the features and effects included in Pretend. I've already released a video on how to use animation via the effects panel, which I'll be sure to add in this description. This view allows you to animate different controls of your clip, including audio, color, transform, and framing controls. Just pick one to view its value and double-click or right-click to add a keyframe. You can then change the value of your keyframes to animate one of the controls and navigate through your different keyframes using these arrows. Once you're done, don't forget to click back on the animation button to access your editing handles. Now that we've familiarized ourselves with our timeline, let's look at how to edit using some of the editing tools available in Pretend. I'll drag a couple more clips into my timeline so we can make some cuts. A highlighted portion will appear on your timeline to indicate where your media will go. You can either insert a clip by dragging it on an empty portion of the timeline, or even between two shots. Or you can completely replace a clip by dragging media over it. You'll notice the clip getting replaced will become highlighted as well. Or you can also press the Command key to drop a clip in the middle of another one. I'll cut off some of the excess using the X key, which activates my razor tool. You can hit X again to get out of this mode. Note that you can click and drag while holding H to pan your timeline. Otherwise, you can always use the scroll bars. You can also double-click between two clips to select a gap and hit Delete to join the two clips together. If you want to duplicate a clip already in your timeline, you can option drag it to wherever you would like to duplicate it. Now we'll click on a clip to select it. This will bring up some of Pretend's editing handles, which are the circles located on the corners and sides of a selected clip. When using editing handles, you'll see that the viewer splits into multiple view modes to show you how each involved shot is affected. Let's go over each editing handle. We'll start with roll. You can drag the orange handle on either upper corners of a selection to roll the shot. A roll will change the edit point of both clips surrounding the handle, so by moving the roll handle between two clips, the edit point changes on both sides of your cut. As you can see, you have a visual display of your cutting point that pops up in the viewer whenever using one of these editing handles. To make a more precise cut, you can also click inside a handle and use your arrow keys on your keyboard to navigate between frames on your timeline. It's also important to note that clicking inside of a handle activates a tooltip displaying the edit type, time code, and delta, which is the change from the last edit. You can click away to exit. Next is ripple. The hands on the middle left and middle right side of the clip are for ripple trim edits. A ripple trim will only modify the edit point of the clip you have selected by pushing or pulling the rest of that clip. Doing so will still maintain the same in or out point of the adjacent clip. You can notice in the viewer that the only clip being affected is the one I'm using the ripple tool on. The adjacent clip still has the same edit point. Moving on to overwrite. The lower left and right corner handles do overwrite trims. An overwrite trim can modify the edit point of both clips surrounding that handle. Pushing out overwrites onto the adjacent clip and pulling in leaves a gap between the two. Next is slip. Dragging the top middle orange handle will slip the clip. This changes the selected clip's in and out points by the same amount, meaning that the clip's content will slip within the boundaries of the timecode it occupies on your timeline. Look to your viewer to see how this is represented. You'll see that only the in and out points of the selection are changing, while the edit points of your adjacent clips remain the same. Last of the edit handles is the slide. Drag the bottom middle orange handle of the selection to slide the shot. By doing so, you'll be moving the clip around your timeline. In the viewer, you'll see that the in and out points of your selected clips remain the same, while the edit points of your adjacent clips change. Also, just keep in mind that you can only slide a clip as far as the end of one of the adjacent clips. And those were all the editing handles you can use to cut your footage. And now that we've gone over using one main timeline, you're ready to start editing in Pretend. Stay tuned for another video on editing with multiple timelines and story groups.